So you're showing up, you're hitting record, getting interviews, but still deep down inside, it still feels like you're podcasting in circles. And it's really frustrating. You're putting in all that work into interviewing and building a really dope podcast, and you really don't have anything to show for it at the end of the day. Listen, I've been there before, and the truth is, your guest strategy might be what's holding you back. So in this video, I am going to break down 4 powerful guest strategies that will help you stop wasting time and get straight to podcasting with purpose so that you can actually see results. All right, so let's get into it. Hey, I'm Ariel. I'm a podcast strategist, and I create videos on this page so that you can create a dope guest experience. That way you can grow your podcast strategically. I got my start in podcasting behind the scenes on the Social Proof podcast, and then I created my own podcast, the Work and Play podcast. You can check it out on this channel or check it out on all podcast platforms. From there, I helped other podcasters start and produce really dope shows, specifically so that they can continue to run their businesses sustainably. So, full transparency, I got into podcasting as an entrepreneur. So the way that I think about podcasting is more about strategy as opposed to passion. And that's really beneficial for you because you can pour all of your blood, sweat, and tears into your podcast, and I can help you on the back end create a really dope guest experience that pays dividends in so many ways. To create a really dope podcast, you have to show up and create quality content. And behind that quality, there's a true passion for what it is that you do. So if you allow me to help you focus on the strategy, you can then create content consistently without the stress of feeling like, I don't really know if this is actually going to hit. So let's get into it. Now, before we get into this video, I don't want you to waste any more time on interview swaps. If someone has told you interview swaps is the best way to build your podcast and build community and just get those reps in, you are wasting your time, especially if you want to monetize your podcast, if you already have a business, and period, if this is not just a hobby. So essentially, what interview swaps are, if you don't know what it is yet, it's when you offer someone to be on your podcast if they let you get on their podcast. So essentially, it's a 1-for-1. You do me a favor, I do you a favor. But the conversations are so disjointed. Before you actually have a guest on your podcast, you want to think, what's the purpose of them being on my podcast anyway? And if you participate in interview swaps, you run the risk of having a bunch of random people on the podcast who don't serve your audience, they don't fit your niche, and they cannot offer value from a monetary perspective or from an experience perspective. Now, if you just want to get your reps in and record just to hear yourself think and hear yourself talk, by all means, get that out the way before you start focusing on podcasting seriously. But if you are actually looking to strategically grow your podcast from the beginning, these next 4 guest strategies are going to be a game changer. Having guests on your podcast is a great way to network, build relationships, and build community. So when you think about these 4 guest strategies, I need you to think about, first and foremost, what is your goal of having these guests on your podcast? Do you have a mainly guest-oriented podcast, or do you sometimes have guests and most of the time it's just you? Thinking about what your goal is when you invite people to your podcast is going to be the most important thing when considering these strategies. So the first one we're going to get into is having guest experts on your podcast. Maybe your podcast is based on personal experience, and you might share on your podcast your weight loss journey and how it gave you confidence. Your personal journey is why people are there. And it's a great thing because these people are listening to you every week and they want to know more about your journey and how it applies to them. Having a guest expert on the podcast can really add value to your experience by giving the scientific backend behind certain weight loss strategies, supplements, and other ways to attain the same fitness goals that you achieved. They can add their professional perspective to your personal journey. Let's talk about some of the pros and cons. First, it boosts credibility and authority through association. Bringing on a guest expert can validate your personal experience so that others know that it's not just you sharing your story, but one that can be replicated over and over and over again. So your results can actually fit others' desired results. Next, it's really great for SEO. This expert should already have their own following. And if they do, your podcast episode can benefit their fans who are searching for them. And last but not least, if your podcast is in a specific niche, it's easy to introduce this guest to your listeners because it fits with what they already know and what they already come to your podcast for. Now, as for the cons, having a guest expert could bring in folks who aren't really your ideal listener. It might attract just their fans. So when you look at your analytics, you need to be clear whether you're seeing normal traffic or if there's a spike in engagement because of that particular guest. That means it's not necessarily about your show, but more so about their audience. Now, if the conversation isn't guided well, you run the risk of surface level conversations. You might not be able to dive deep and get into what they actually know, but do your best to do your research before you have a guest on the podcast. Before you have an expert on your podcast, do your research so you can ask really good questions. A really smart tip would be to ask your listeners, what do they want to know from this particular guest? Do it a couple days in advance. That way you can prepare for your podcast. Now, another thing to watch out for, if you've already started offering services or a product on your podcast, having a guest expert could sometimes distract from your offer and push people to theirs. Think about where you are in your selling cycle. Are you introducing a new product or focusing on your own product right now? If you are, then you might want to delay having a guest expert so that it can later reinforce what you've already created on your podcast, as opposed to introducing something to your audience before you've actually introduced your own. But if you don't have an offer yet, this could be a great way to start monetizing your podcast from the beginning, having someone who has an offer. Now, the next type of guest that you want to consider for your podcast is industry colleagues, people who are already in your industry on the same level as you. And maybe they're not an expert, but they can have a well thought out conversation about what you talk about on your podcast. They don't necessarily have to be an expert, but they're someone in your field, either a peer or someone you respect, and you can have a well thought out discussion about the problems that you're both solving. This positions you as a thought leader and an insider to these topics. It helps you build relationships with the peers in your industry, and it could possibly even open up the door for collaborations. That way you can monetize in multiple different ways through these conversations. Now, if you have a business, these type of guests are really great for engaging warm leads. These are people who are listening, but they haven't engaged yet. So by having a conversation with another professional, it can trigger your listeners to take action on something that you offer. Now, the best thing about these industry discussions is that you can hit on topics that are current. This keeps your podcast trending and top of mind for the listeners who care about what's happening in your niche. Now, we have to talk about the cons. So if you're a service provider or an entrepreneur, this may not directly lead to clients. Some conversations are just interesting, thought-provoking, but not necessarily action-driving. If you're not structured, it can run off course into opinions and theories without really any backing behind what you're talking about. And if your audience isn't familiar with the topic, the episode may or may not land. So stay on top of what your listeners are interested in and bring in people to have conversations around things that you've always wanted to talk about, but now you have someone to bounce ideas off of to get your listeners engaged even more. Now, this next guest strategy is perfect for entrepreneurs or coaches because it helps you build social proof. It really shows what kind of work you're capable of doing. It shows how you think, how you respond to certain topics, how you actually work on the spot. If you've delivered a service or a product and it helps someone, bring them onto the podcast. Let them share where they are and where they were before they started working with you. On the podcast, you can talk about what did they try before you, what they're trying even now, and how their life has changed after working with you. You can talk about things that most clients are thinking about. How did they sustain their results? This builds trust and it gives real evidence that you can help others too, and that maybe you'd be able to help them. It's like a really long, drawn-out testimonial. Having past clients on your podcast also lets you naturally showcase your method without hard selling. Let your results speak for themselves. You're educating your listener on what you do just by having the conversation. So it warms up listeners who are watching from the sidelines, hearing someone else's story that can actually get them to finally take action. Now, there's always a couple things to watch out for when you have past clients. Clients aren't always the most dynamic speakers. You'll need to prep them ahead of time if you want the show to flow smoothly. Without any guidance, the episode can really fall flat, and every episode sounds the same. It can get really repetitive. So you have to be thoughtful about which clients you want to bring on the podcast and how they can offer an array of experiences so your listeners can know you deal with a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Think to yourself, what makes this client story unique and how can I apply it to my listeners and potential clients for that matter? Now, if you're not careful, it can sound like a commercial. So prep your client. I can't say it enough. Make it conversational and let your audience come to their own conclusion about working with you. When you have past clients on your podcast, it reduces the barrier that potential clients have when they hop on a sales call with you. So they're not guarded. They already built some trust with you and they know that you've been able to help others. You just have to seal the deal by letting them know you can help them. Now, this last one is a golden goose. If you're a business owner, this is the most direct path to converting a guest into a client. Now, what do I mean by that? Inviting a potential guest onto your podcast allows you to dive into their challenges real time and let them share their true struggles. That allows you to show them your true value real time. You can help them process what they're going through, and that way they start associating you with being able to solve their problems. This kind of content mirrors your audience's journey, and it builds a bank of content that highlights the problems you solve. You don't even have to release them all. If nothing else, this is really, really good market research. So having these podcasts out in the public only adds even more authenticity to the people who are following your journey and the people who need your help. Now, before you jump in and have your next prospect join you on the podcast, listen to this. These conversations could drive high engagement or low engagement depending on how relatable this guest is. It's unpredictable. You may or may not decide to publish the episode depending on how it turns out, but the bottom line is the prep work really goes into you being able to set the tone about what your podcast is about and how it actually applies to them in their story without making it a really salesy conversation. Depending on how transparent they get with you on the podcast, you might want to make sure you have permission to air the conversation before you release their dirty laundry. When you think about it, most discovery calls require the client to let their guards down and to really tell you what's going on in their business or their life so that you can help them fix their problem. And so if they're sharing this on the podcast, it makes for really, really great content. But you also want to get that permission so that there's no backlash on the back end. The prep looks a little bit different when the guest is a potential client. You need to prep that guest by asking the right questions as if you were thinking about qualifying them as a client and not just a podcast guest. Now, the questions you share with them beforehand, they need to be the right questions so that this conversation feels natural and it feels helpful, not that you're exploiting their issue for your own personal gain. This strategy takes practice, but when you do it right, it helps to build your content and it helps you grow your business at the same time. Just know, the first conversation might not close the deal, but it builds the relationship and it sets you up for a great follow-up. Now, whether you have an offer or you don't have an offer, sometimes you want to have guests on the podcast that really feel your soul and they really lighten you up. And sometimes they give you really great advice that your listeners could also benefit from, but you also take a whole bunch of notes away from as well. So this bonus guest that you can have on your podcast in any capacity would be to interview your mentors. Ask questions you would normally ask behind closed doors, but do it on the podcast so that your audience can benefit too. From a mentee to mentor relationship, having your mentor on the podcast adds value to them. It gives them visibility, then it helps you grow, and it helps your listeners get value by listening to the podcast. It's a win-win-win all the way around. If you've been thinking about having your mentor on your podcast, let this be your excuse to go ahead and interview them. All right. That's all 4 guest strategies that are certainly going to help you build your podcast and even monetize it sooner than later. Let me know in the comments which strategies you're already using and some of the tweaks you might consider after listening to this video. Most people invite people onto their podcast just because it's fun, but you have to be strategic about the people you have on your podcast so that it keeps you intentional. You don't want to see yourself create a whole bank of content and then look back and wonder, how did I get here and what does this have to do with anything on my podcast? Be intentional and you won't regret it. This is how you stop podcasting in circles and start building something that actually grows. Let me know in the comments if you're already using any of these guest strategies and which one is working best for you already. But until next time, I'll see you in the next video.